Today my subject is this gorgeous Forsythia. The challenge is the yellow color is not as easy to work with. Watch this demo and you will see why, and you'll also learn how to get around it, how not to end up with yellow looking flat. I'm working on Art Spectrum Color Fix paper. It's sanded paper, and I'm going to actually wash a little bit of the pigment that I'm using, this dry pigment. And that's because I have very dark things in the background here that I don't really want to work too hard and trying to blend them in. I just want to get these areas, create this nice background. That's going to help my tree to stand out. Now the trick to creating a nice underpainting for this tree is actually not to get the exact colors that I see in the reference, but actually the colors that are either a little bit darker or a little bit cooler, so it's not exactly the same. And as far as a little bit darker, I can do that here at the bottom. This is the ground. I actually have to confess here, I did make some changes from the photo, which I'm pretty much doing all the time anyway. So maybe let's get a little bit of that cooler color, particularly here. I just want to kind of capture that explosion of golden color that we get to see in spring. And as far as the grass, here closer to us, I'm going to use these reds and kind of meld them into the distance. And let's get a little bit of pink here. So this is not going to be as dark as those trees that we actually see in the picture, but it's still giving me enough darker value that I won't have to fight too hard. Yeah, here's the gloves are catching a little bit. And sometimes people ask me, so why do you paint in gloves? Well, there are some inconvenient moments to that, but overall, it's something that helps me to keep my hands better, healthier. Okay, so that's the layout. And yes, here the photograph, the changes I made, actually I added some daffodils because it just wasn't interesting enough just with one tree and no other elements to support it. Okay, the underpainting I'm going to do will be the Isopropyl Alcohol underpainting. This is 70%. And then I just pour it, a little bit of it, and dip my brush, but not really soaking wet because your pigment will run off. But if you don't have enough, then you might be just kind of trying to rub the pigment into the fibers of the paper, but it will be resisting. So the trick is, with experience, to learn how much liquid you will need. It's like getting a little too dry, right? And you also want to rinse the brush. So here I have a separate jar, kind of like you would work with watercolor. Clean your brush, and then because it's very wet after that, then you want to blot it a little bit again so that it's not really dripping with water. And repeat, literally rinse and repeat. So I don't want to get too much of that in, but in this case, kind of having that purple merging a little bit with the top branches is not the bad idea, but I don't want to make some of that purple too dirty. Here with these purples and the sky before I get to the earthier and more red colors. So when I do the underpainting, I'm trying not to have very sharp edges. And it is very general shape in the underpainting. I'm not going to worry about separate branches, kind of stuff like that. Okay. So it's just basically this light or mid-tone brown orangey shape silhouetted against this kind of purple, soft purple background. So it's not going to just kind of jump in your face. And if the paper shows a little bit, it's not that bad either. Now I can just continue with this a little bit. Yes, I can still kind of mimic with my brush marks, maybe like the daffodils, kind of create a little bit of that, but it's for the most part it's not going to stay, it's just going to be covered with pastels. But it does create a certain energy, and sometimes it is showing through, and it's nice to have it. So this is what we have. Now it's going to dry. Maybe I'll secure it here as well. It does get bloated a little bit, puffy, but it's going to dry. It will be a little bit more flat. All right, this is dry, and you can see it's not really that dark, but it's dark enough. And I'm going to take this brown color and get the part. It's pretty dark at the ground. I'm gonna start reclaiming my drawing back. And this is hot pastel, and this is pretty intense dark on the photo, but it doesn't mean that it has to be exactly that intensity. I can make it a little bit darker later. Very loose and have a lot of light. So I'm set for light over here with this beautiful atmospheric purple. And there's a house. I can show the house, just a suggestion of the house. Okay, I want now to get some of these darker tree trunks behind, and I'm just going with a softer pastels for this now, and kind of in a design that is not very symmetrical. I do have some suggestions from the photo, of course, and I follow some. So this my major, maybe darker shape, and I make sure it's not exactly in the center, and actually it's a little bit slanted at an angle. There's something here, maybe behind the house. It's going to be very suggestive. So the whole thing, I just want it to be filled with light, but it doesn't have to be realistic as much. But the light has to be. At this point, the light has to be realistic. And there is that darker hedge there in the distance. I kind of like that. It is a suggestion, kind of something being there. That's where the house is. Maybe like that's the darker shape of the tree. Then of course we have this one here, but not doing that yet. Let's use this nice dark green for that. Then here on the tree, there's some of that ivy growth. And we have very dark areas here. And for the shadows from the trees, now here the shadow parts of the daffodils or darker. So same green is going to work. And a little bit here. I don't really want to do much with hot pastels. Maybe just a little here, because everything is already set, the colors. So now the softer pastels will give me better coverage. So the trees, the branches, they don't really have foliage yet. And I do have the purple color already set, so it's going to be between, but it has to show the light. Some purples, some grays, but it has to be a little bit darker as well in some areas, but still atmospheric. Like here we also see nice atmospheric color. And then even a little bit of a reddish, a little bit more neutral color, something like that. It's not exactly there if you're looking for it probably, but I just feel that it's going to do a good job. Again, here we have some light passing through that bush or tree. And it has to be a little bit lighter, even though it's kind of light gray, but it should be warmer light gray. Something like this, because the light is passing through it, through those bare branches so far. Maybe the leaves are just starting. And I'm going to start adding a little bit of that light green for the grasses and also for the daffodils here. And overall, I don't want to start refining any areas until I actually have other areas at least kind of blocked in with the average color. And here that shows me the grass and how it recedes in the distance. And of course, the closer it is to us, the more detail we are going to have. And I like how that kind of reddish brown underneath interacts with it. It's a nice coming from it. So here in the foreground, it's very bright. The grass is very bright, but I'm just going to do this, because then we have like that mulch, I guess, area, or just kind of dry branches or something. I don't want to overwhelm it. We are going to have already a lot of glow here, but to just kind of suggest it, that's the idea. And maybe in the shadow, see how this is like after working like this on the side of this stick, working too much in a cross-hatchy way. I either have to add it somewhere else, or it just will look like it doesn't belong there. I have to keep it a little bit more unified with my marks as well. I want to add those windows maybe. Let's just suggest maybe something like, it's not dark enough. How about this? Like this, and here, I think, as well. Actually, even longer looks like, but it should be enough for what I plan. And that's it. Then it's maybe, shouldn't really have that too close. Well, now I'm just going to let this kind of tree here. And I'm going to keep it like this with thinner lines, so it's contrast with the other trees. And here I can start also adding maybe a few branches here and there. So to get a little bit more of the effect of the branches, kind of smaller branches, I'm going to add that. And if I wanted, actually, I could make it a blooming tree, but I don't want to do that here. And what's going to make it really interesting now is adding the sky and how I can use this purple, pinkish purple, cooler colors also, how I can use all that background to suggest those thin branches out of them. The color I'm going to use, it's not going to be the lightest blue, because first I'm kind of getting very close to those branches, so it should be in value close enough to the neighboring area, unless it's an opening, right? Unless it's an opening and we have this sky showing through, and that will start adding some light into the picture. And that is tricky, this type of stuff, and if you end up just kind of drawing very sharp-edged openings, it just might start looking too busy, unreal. This roof is way too low. I put my windows a little too large and a little too high up there, so I probably want to just kind of do that. Maybe even this. And if it starts looking the same kind of, then I also might want to have larger area of bloom somewhere smaller. Maybe show some of the thinner trees, suggesting. And it's getting a little too sharply outlined, so I will add some of the maybe like purple there, tree, so some of that. And if, like I said, this orangey brown, I would say, being a little too sharp-edged, I want to soften that and maybe bring a little bit more of that background color of the smaller branches. So, but what about the star of the show, right? Well, the reason why I'm spending time setting up the background right now is because this bush, Forsythia bush, is overlapping the background. So once I do those branches, it's kind of point of no return, at least not a very successful return. That's why I want to get as close to finished in the background area as possible, or at least in the parts that are overlapping. And now let's suggest a little bit of light, kind of brighter light here next to the and I'm going to take this and bring some of the so I will bring it here, and that's for that darker part. And I also would like to have that light kind of looking through this color. And then let's get some of the kind of greenish yellow, I would say. And that's my shadow color. And that's the difficult part about yellows, that we just want to grab the lightest yellows and then we realize it looks flat. But if we start building it up like this with the shadows in mind, first with the shadows, it's actually going to be quite nice. And I even give it a little bit of orange here to kind of warm it up. And what about those daffodils, right? Well, I'll get to that. That's a little bit more towards oranges. So I can push these colors more towards greens or towards kind of red oranges. And here, because the house actually is just going to stay that suggested shape, I can actually show how it's going to look. And I can suggest some of the branches. This is a little cool. I think I need brown color because there's a lot of that yellow bouncing within that and creating some of this beautiful light. And I don't need to get every branch, but just want to get a few with some character, not just sticking straight up, and some depth. That somewhere it's actually darker, like when it's close to the ground here. Maybe I want to get a little bit of this greener color here. So I want to mix, not just one or the other. I want to mix of those colors. Maybe I want to suggest one of them maybe here in the distance too, instead of that other, whatever that bush is. So to make the ground a little bit darker, more like a shadow under this purple was alright, and maybe just softening that coolness and soften maybe some of the. But what about those daffodils, right? So maybe it's time to add a few, and I want them to kind of lead into the background there. Maybe even here a little bit of that lighter green, so that it's kind of connecting shape, not just one and then the other. And there's this nice kind of neutral pinkish purplish gray, so maybe to add some of the light here. Tree trunks. And after that, I want to have the area of the sky that's a little bit more open, so it's not just this kind of looking through the trees happening everywhere. So if I spend a lot of time just gonna trying to find the right balance, I could get that better, but here I just want to kind of get that overall feeling for the light. That was too far. This one here should be 3. That's to soften. So this is on the shadow side. Kind of set that grass against the darker area. And I like how it's kind of blending the color at the same time. It's kind of grayed down darker green here. And I can bring some of it here. Get some of these shadows maybe a little bit less jumping out with all that texture, but kind of softening a little bit. And it's not just texture, it's also that warmer color that I added there. But this way it looks more atmospheric. Closer to me here, I can use a little bit more chromatic green, but this is probably not dark enough, but I can try. I think it works. And I also suggest the grass this way. And it's darker, the shadows are darker closer to the trees, to the object that is casting those shadows. And it looks like I cannot do that more intense dark just with a hot pastel, so for that I would go for softer pastel. And if I need to kind of suggest maybe the darker areas under the trees, that separation between the ground and the trees, even here, not just like a sphere, and breaking it up a little. And even that is not really as dark, probably, if I want to have a little bit more of emphasis on that. Like here there was that tree, right, that I kind of eliminated, but let's say this is the tree, but the shadow around it actually is darker. So it's that negative shape. And here, well, here the tree gets darker, so let's just run with that. It all will become a background for the yellow bush Forsythia, but it actually might create kind of extra interest. So not all trees are the same kind of exact darker color, and not on every side of those trees, so watch for that when you paint your trees, because you don't want them flat. Sometimes they are kind of flat in certain lighting, but usually there's some variation. Like part of the trunk can be darker, part lighter, because of the light it receives. So this one is kind of... And I also want to add a little bit of light on the tree trunk. Let's get a little bit more dark here around, so that we get more mass, and then eventually, like I keep saying, it will be the background. I can start suggesting some of the branches. But not in the distance. And I want to keep some of this kind of sketchy look. And if it gets a little too dark, I can downplay it. The gray down color. Maybe it should be warmer, something like this with more yellow to it. Let's make it catch some of that light, particularly here on a larger, on a thicker tree, and it will add kind of more interest to it, more light. It's kind of tempting to start outlining all sorts of branches and trees, but try not to, because it will end up too much of a good thing. Might not end up being as good. Alright, this is the part I'm not going to start being too picky about. Those changes I want to be able to do later, so I don't want to start filling the paper in, because it's taking some time, but I showed the principle how I would approach it. So let's get a little bit more of this gray down color when connecting with this, and maybe showing it in the distance as the branches. And that went too far, that house, we don't need that sky there. And there's also a little bit of the darker color here, just was a little too light looking, but it's also a little bit warmer green. Kind of like this sketchy approach, the marks. So this is more heavier shape now. I don't know if it really should be that much, but let's bring some green into it, because that's that growth, the vines on it, and some green here, and also here for the daffodils. At the bottom, then I can add a little bit more emphasis, how the shapes are separating. And it is tempting to elaborate on these shadows, but I don't want them to be too sharp, too pronounced. Now a little bit of a kind of this spiky look for the daffodils, and then I'll add the flowers. So I want them kind of gradually also continue into the distance. And if we look closer, there's a little bit of light here on some of these leaves. Maybe first it should be this kind of cooler, but still a little bit lighter. Detail, designed few leaves, sketching a little bit of light maybe passing through them, highlights, but I'm not going to get into that much of a detail. So here's finally the flower time, and to show them glowing, I'm going to get very light color, something like this maybe. Would be nice to have some of them kind of in the shadow, and this is basically just very approximate shapes. I'm not going to draw them one by one, it's just silhouettes, but something that will show. And they can also alternate a little bit. They can also alternate maybe something that's a little bit more in the shadow, looking a little cooler, maybe like closer to the ground. And those that are the petals here, for example, some petals are catching more light and others not so much. And let's have a little bit here as well. Well, again, this should be how the eye will move. And before that, before the bright color, maybe here in the shadows, I'll add that a little bit darker color like what I was using here, so it's all consistent. And then I can add something that sparkles more in the sun. Now they actually have quite a bit of shadows. So maybe something in between like that. Just a few. Not all of them are going to be kind of turned to you at the same angle. And maybe some of them are yellow. white. So that will change the picture. Well, I hope you were watching not just for the Forsythia, because it took me forever to get to it, right? I did everything else before I got here. So now I can start with the highlights on the Forsythia. And I can even do these cool marks. I think I got too far there. This is a little harder pastel. It's not hot pastel, but it's kind of more compressed stick. So these type of marks, kind of calligraphic marks, work pretty good on that. But I like the color, and see how fun it is to create those branches. And that's what I was talking about. The trees, and then everything behind the bush will turn into the backdrop. So we don't need that much detail in the backdrop, right? It just adds volume, otherwise it will start competing with what we want to be the center of attention. Well, maybe before I get into this, let's set the direction. Let's get those lighter branches. Kind of draw them so that I know which way I'm going with my marks. It doesn't have to be that specific, but there's a certain shape. So let's do this, because that also brings a little something, like these branches, and it goes up quite high there, and we can cover those very suggested windows. All right, I think that works, and I can add some of that within. Because they are thicker at some point, and don't be afraid to add that. So I have the whole bunch of yellows I can be using. That was a little bit greener, lighter, which again, it stands out beautifully against that, but it's a little harder. I want to get a little softer color, so it's easier to just kind of touch the paper and get the mark. So it's still working very nicely, but these are brighter, and maybe I just want to create the overall highlight kind of here in the area as well, and on the outside, and I want to go outside with that. I don't want to start pushing the darker color in, and kind of, so the light within the branches, we can show the light. And I really like it, working with this bright color. Once everything else is set up, otherwise it wouldn't be so fun trying to get in and to modify something. This one is a little bit and a little less chroma in it because it's a little lighter. So even in those highlights, I can still create not much of it, lighter highlights too. So I don't don't even know if I want to go that light right now, because that really should be the ultimate. And I don't probably want to go even lighter than that. I want to actually add a little bit more of this green, maybe here to this more of a shadow side here.
Well, if you are still with me, please give this video a like if you enjoyed, and I think you did since it kept your attention for a while. That helps me a lot to have this video seen by more people on YouTube.
Maybe even separate some of these branches, because we do see a lot of light through it. It's not really a thick tree or anything, but I don't want to become predictable. Here's a nice Cherry Ludwig pastel. It's kind of going to take care of some of this a little lighter areas, but the ones that I don't want to just going to be very saturated. Maybe that. So at this point, if I want to kind of create maybe a little bit kind of in the detail between the branches, if it's still the color that's in the background, I can very lightly suggest it. But something like this, you make a mark like this, you don't want to mess with that. I think it works. I think it already worked. But there's something so nice about purple and yellow together, right? They are for a reason complementary colors. And some light on those branches. And particularly here, some really sunlit branches. And we have some really kind of, oops. So marks like this, you make them and you have to live with them because it's difficult to change. Maybe not this one. They became a little too parallel. You don't want that. So that wasn't too bad. I could actually correct it. This is not a good idea though. The edge of the tree, and I have this mark kind of outlining it, connecting right to it. So that wasn't good. So if anything, it should be something like this, maybe. But I better stop doing these experiments because I showed the idea, and now if I just stay with that and finish. Okay, I have this color, this greener color, and this one. It seems close. Okay, this one is a little greener, so I want a little bit more of them. Because I think in this particular picture, this reference, that's what really attracted me, this kind of bursting branches with this gold. So remember that saying about too much of a good thing, build up. Well, it might happen here. A big bend kind of filling in. It just seems to be so much fun. Maybe like somewhere here it catches more light, and here. And on the edge, we are going to see a little bit of that backlighting effect. And also within the tree, oh, it's not the tree, probably it's a bush, maybe. But we also will have kind of sparkling light because we see through. But again, don't make it too predictable. Yellow. And this top of the tree seems to be a brighter lit, right? So going just overall lighten that shape on this side. And it's getting a little bit of a here with the so it is a good sign that I need to stop very soon because it's just kicking up at this point in some areas. This beautiful detail again comes kind of forward, the branches come forward, and let's show that kind of maybe here they start catching some light and they're closer to us, and they too are going to get this sprinkle of let's just to kind of extend it a little bit so it's not just this sphere, kind of a little boring. Of course the color, it's making it very exciting, not boring. You can tell that I'm really into this. So I really need to stop at this point because I think it has plenty of light and plenty of, so you can really get into this stuff as you see. That's if you want to silhouette some of those branches. But again, so much yellow, it's probably time to stop, otherwise I will start losing that darker area, and we need that as well. Okay, that was fun. Let's just continue here. We continue the darker grass into that area. And this is a cooler green, so it's still okay in the shadow. Maybe something like this. Demo and okay, so that's a suggestion. It's behind there. You probably don't want to do that as a house. Maybe like this. Some green. Again, too much if I start piling up the detail. We already have enough of the detail there. These thin branches. And just a few. It's a lot easier to do the flowers when they are that small. That's a little too much. It was almost like lined up. So that's why you want to take your time, maybe a little bit, to make sure it doesn't line up. Okay, I hope you had fun watching this. Now ready to paint your blooming spring or blossoming spring trees. So I kept everything else there pretty sketchy, not really trying to get the definition of the trees. If you want more detail, you can definitely go ahead and add it, but I wanted that light passing through the trees. I wanted to create the contrast of that with the shadows and the light on the ground, and of course all of it is still a backdrop for me, having fun adding these beautiful branches with glowing flowers on them. Okay, if you enjoyed this demo, I hope you will give it a like, and I have other trees, the demos of other trees, so you can watch them as well if you haven't yet.
Check out the materials I was using in this demo in the description below.
And I will see you in the next video.